And I'll share the screen. And I think that'll do it. Do that, that, and that. Okay. I hate when I do that because I lose the people. But we'll try it again here. People. Put that over here. Somehow when I share this, I lose your picture. So if you make faces at me, I won't be able to understand it. All right. Well, we're gonna hopefully finish up Micah today. It's a lot of reading and fewer questions. But something that Jeff did Sunday, if you heard his sermon, he talked about good verses for a Merry Christmas, and he talked about this peace on earth, goodwill to men, and he read this passage in Isaiah 26, which is sort of how do you have peace in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of difficulties. And two things that came out of that was you fix your eyes on Jesus, and then you lean in, you trust in him. And you rely on him to get you through the tough times, and then the promise there that he'll be there and he'll carry you through. And I was really excited about that because every now and then Jeff will really track with our class, and it's really good that he's able to keep up with us. But this is the theme of the last two chapters of Micah. We've read about. I'll just do the regroup slide here. We read about these three cycles of judgments of hope. The first was against the nations, but there was still a promise. Bad news, but there's some good news there. There's a promise there. And then we talked about the leaders and how the leaders were leading the nations astray, that their own corruption, their own gain was creating issues that all would suffer because of their leadership. But Micah contrasted their leadership with the leadership of the one from Bethlehem, who will come as a shepherd to gather his people and rule as a king in righteousness and justice. And again, you have the situation is the leadership that's gone awry, but the promise of Jesus being the shepherding, bringing people together to care for them, and yet to rule as a king with righteousness and perfect justice. And then we go into the third cycle, these last two chapters. It's the judgment of the people and their ultimate restoration. And God is justified in doing what he's doing. And we're going to read God's explanation of why he's doing what he's doing. And then Micah gives us a picture of a proper response. And it really does mirror what Jeff said on Sunday, which is, like I said, it's really glad when Jeff's able to keep up with us. All right, so let me start with Cindy, if you don't mind, and we'll just start right into it.
Hear now what the Lord says. Arise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, O mountains, the Lord's indictment, you enduring foundations of the earth. For the Lord has a case against his people, and he will argue it against Israel.
Yeah, so is God justified judging his people? God is going to plead his case. Is he justified in bringing the action of judgment? Is he right to do so? And so he begins to lay out his case here. And then the Bradleys.
My people, what have I done to you? Testify against me how I have wearied you. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery. I sent Moses before you, as well as Aaron and Miriam.
So God's going to lay out what he's done already for them. And then this is Nancy.
My people remember that Balak, king of Moab, counseled, and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, so that you may acknowledge the righteousness of the Lord.
Yeah, I purposely selected you for this verse.
I figured that. Where's Lori when you need her?
Okay, so Balak and Balaam is in Numbers 22 and 24. And if you remember, Balak was an opposing king and wanted Balaam for a fee to curse the Israelites. And Balaam said, I will only speak what God tells me to speak. And instead of cursing, Balaam blesses. So God's protection is there, even though there's shenanigans going on. And then the Shittim to Gilgal references in Numbers 25 and also in Joshua 4. And so Balaam was compelled to prophesy blessing. And so what Balak did was try to mislead Israel into immorality, the intermarriage and some other things to try to get them off the course. But even so, God allows them to cross the Jordan to their promise, to the land that was promised, the covenant promise with Abraham. And then Gilgal's where the memorial, the 12 stones, when they cross the Jordan, that's where that is, just to give you a historical context. And then Harry or Chris.
With what shall I come before the Lord when I bow before the God on high? Should I come to him with burnt offerings, with year-old calves? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I present my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?
And so we shift here from Micah answering God. And what when you read this, what is Micah saying? Is this what I should do? He's considering his options. And what is he trying to do here?
Please the Lord.
Yeah, he's trying to please him, but how's he trying to please him?
Material things.
Yeah, I'm going to buy him off. Right? I'm going to earn my way to restoration. I'm going to do all these sacrificial things so that I'm looked upon as, righteous or repentant or whatever. I'm going to try to buy my way. And he's convicted of what God says about his own righteousness. And his first response, should I do this? Should I do all these? Should I do these rivers of oil? Should I give my firstborn? And then we get to this beautiful verse of Micah. And John, you have the pleasure of reading this one.
He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God?
Yeah, so put that in a modern context. If we think about God's righteousness and we think about circumstances because of sinfulness, what does God require of us in our place and in our time?
He requires me to follow the teachings of Jesus, to love everybody that he puts in my sphere, and to always seek him for guidance and obey what he tells me to do.
Yeah, it just like this. It's that simple and that hard. Yeah. This message of Micah's response is the same message for us today. In our area where we can, in our influence where we have it, to be just, to love mercy, and to walk humbly.
How would you paraphrase love mercy?
Well, mercy is I'm due a punishment, but I don't mete that punishment out. So I would say that's forgiveness would be a key part of that. Do we forgive one another for the shortcomings? Do we work to restore rather than to condemn? Those would be the two elements that I think I would raise out of that. What do others
Do we
say?
accept people as they are?
Well, that's part of it. They accept them as sinners, just like we are, with the same goal that God has when he accepts a sinner. I accept you where you are, but I ain't going to leave you there. In love, I'm going to advance you. I'm going to try to build you up. I'm going to try to restore you. As best as I'm able, as God gives me direction.
I think also you said, you already said this, but I think you already said this, but where it's not deserved. So
Yeah.
even, to show mercy to somebody in your life doesn't deserve it.
Yeah.
Because God shows us mercy that we don't deserve, even if they don't ask for it.
What's Peter say? Should I forgive my brother 7 times?
Yeah.
No, mercifully. even more than that. Now, well, let's continue on with this dialogue with God here. This will be back to Cindy.
Voice of the Lord calls out to the city, and it is sound wisdom to fear your name. Heed the rod and the one who ordained it. Can I forget any longer, O house of the wicked, and treasures of wickedness, and the short ephah, which is accursed?
Anybody know what an ephah is? It's a short measure. It's a measure of flour on a scale. I'm gonna go to the market. I'm gonna buy, 2 pounds of flour, 2 ephahs of flour. And if you weight that wrong, you're cheating somebody. It's an unjust thing. And it's an example of taking advantage of someone. And so God's saying, this is what I've seen. This is how you've been. You're not doing justice. You're not loving mercy. And you're not walking humbly. So I am justified in taking this action. This is what I see. And then Sean or Abigail.
Can I excuse dishonest scales or bags of false weights? For the wealthy of the city are full of violence, and its residents speak lies. Their tongues are deceitful in their mouths.
Don't you think of the riffraff of society usually being the violent ones? Right?
Mhm.
The poor, disenfranchised, they're in the ghetto. Those are the ones that, are the violent ones. And what does God recognize here about violence?
The wealthy are the ones
Yeah,
that are full of violence.
they are taking advantage for their own gain. They're taking advantage of others.
Is that any different in today's world?
I was gonna say,
No.
I was going to say I don't think it is, and that's why when I read this, I think there's some stuff here that we should kind of be paying attention to. Nancy, if you'd continue this section.
Therefore, I am striking you severely to ruin you because of your sins. You will eat, but not be satisfied, and your hunger will remain with you. What you acquire, you will not preserve, and what you save, I will give to the sword.
So God says, yeah, because you're doing this, because you continue doing this, because you're not being just and merciful and humble, because you're not being what I've asked you to do, then I am justified in taking action. I am right to take action, and I will take action, and I am going to take action. And he lays out what he's going to do here. And then Chris or Harry, the next one.
Yes, you will sow, but not reap. You will press olives, but not anoint yourselves with oil. You will tread grapes, but not drink the wine. You have kept the statutes of Omri and all the practices of Ahab's house. You have followed their counsel.
Okay, just a little background on that. I had to look up. I obviously don't know this. But instead of following the 10 commandments, God's commandments and the law, they followed the statutes of Ahab, who was the son of Omri, an idolatrous dynasty in northern kingdom. And there's a reference there for 1 Kings. And Judas is following that example, the example of the northern kingdom, the example of the kingdom that's already been overrun by Assyria because of their disobedience. And yet they're still following the way they know is not God's way. And you continue to follow these, God's saying. And so I am justified in taking this action.
So is that why I'm considered fat, because I will eat but not be filled?
No comment.
I was going to say, that's not why we think you're fat, Harry. I think it's simpler than that. Same reason I am. Okay, let's see. I think I'm to you, John.
Therefore, I will make you a desolation, and your inhabitants an object of contempt. You will bear the scorn of the nations.
Not only will you be taken down, not only everything that you have will be taken away, not only your dignity, all of these things you think you have because you're the children of God, that will all be taken away. And even then, now you're going to be laughed at. You're going to be mocked. You know, you thought you were so powerful when you're nothing. So, I mean, just total judgment. But now we get to the response, and this is, come back to you, Cindy.
Woe is me, for I am like one gathering summer fruit at the gleaning of the vineyard. There is no cluster to eat, no early fig that I crave.
Yeah, so Micah now responds to God's charge, the reason God is doing what he's doing, the justification God has in executing this judgment. And each time he said it, you know, there's this promise. In the first cycle, there's this promise of restoration. In the second cycle, there's the promise of new leadership, of righteous leadership through Jesus. But Micah is now responding to God's reason for why he's moving forward. You know, woe is me. I understand my situation. Okay, and then Sean or Abigail.
A godly man has perished from the earth. There is no one upright among men. They all lie in wait for blood. They hunt one another with a net. Both hands are skilled at evil. The prince and the judge demand a bribe. When the powerful utters his evil desire, they all conspire together.
God's laid out the reason. What does Micah understand about the nation?
That all goodness is gone.
Yeah. He looks at it too. And what does he see?
Just evil desire among men.
Kind of sees the same thing God sees, doesn't he?
Yep.
Yep.
So what's his conclusion? Is God justified?
Yes.
Yeah. Because he looks at it, he sees the same thing God sees. Yes, this is evil. There is no one upright. There is no one not deserving of judgment. They're at each other's throats. They're skilled at evil. You know, the leaders are corrupt.
Crazy to think there is not one upright among men.
Good thing the women were all good.
Yeah, well, oh, come on. Yeah, well, for all of sin and fall short of the glory of God. I kind of heard that when I read that. And we're all in this.
I was saying, I wonder if it came to the point where the pressure of all of the evil people stifled the people. You know, people were no longer willing to stand up because of fear, or no longer, because it says they all conspire together. And
Right.
sometimes that, I mean, I don't know this from experience. I've been told by friends that sometimes if you're in the wrong crowd, sometimes the wrong crowd will convince you to do what they do because it's the mob mentality.
The Jackson 5 had a song just about that, right? One bad apple spoils a whole bunch.
Yeah. I think
I,
that was
I won't sing. I won't sing it to you, but
Thank you.
yeah, it
we
is.
also know this is a little bit of an exaggeration because God preserved some of them, like we said last week, Daniel and
Mhm.
and his pals. And
Yeah.
so
We would call that
The remnant.
well, yeah. I'm about this literary thing. It's hyperbole, right? Where you
Oh,
where you,
yeah.
you sort of exaggerate it a little bit, but
Yeah.
he looks at it and he definitely sees the same evil that.
yeah.
I mean, he's righteous as a prophet. Okay, I think I'm to you, Nancy. Or maybe I had a question here. We already did that. So, Nancy.
The best of them is like a briar. The most upright is sharper than a hedge of thorns. The day for your watchman is come, the day for your visitation. Now is the time of their confusion.
Yeah. And so this is his conclusion about what he sees. That the best of them is just a prickly mess. You know, I love that. I love this metaphor. He's comparing the nation to this just bramble of thorns. None of it's good. It's not worth anything. You know, it's just prickly everywhere you go. And the time's now come, and he realizes the time for God's judgment is upon them. And then Harry or Chris.
Do not rely on a friend. Do not trust in a companion. Seal the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your arms. For a son dishonors his father, a daughter rises against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the members of his own household.
Yeah. There's a lot of relationships in this little verse. Do you see any of that in our culture?
Yes.
All right, you get the follow-up question, John. What do you see?
Hmm.
It's all the women's fault.
Oh. When it says his own household, does that just mean the people that are your relatives, or does that mean everybody that you're friends with?
I don't know. What does this image kind of convey to you? What's the impression that you get from what's going on there?
Can't trust anybody.
Right.
It reminds me of the one commandment, the children should honor their parents.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you definitely have that fundamental relationship of family is
Mhm.
destroyed, in addition to all the societal things he talked about before. But even within the family, there's this destruction that's happening.
Which will also come about in the last days too, that he says too.
Yeah.
Isn't that always around to some degree? Even bad times,
Well, yeah, because it's
even good times.
because it's evil. Yeah, and that's always among us.
Yeah, and historically and culturally, like the Asian cultures, they usually have more multi-generational families. And in order to do that, you got to get along. You got to
Mhm.
find a way to respect or just agree to disagree, or, and in the United States, they don't. If you disagree, see ya, you're on your own, and
It's too much
children,
all about me, right?
yeah. And it's all about do what you want now and what makes you feel good and what you think you should do. And
Mhm.
you be you.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what anybody else says.
Yeah, don't worry about the family honor.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about what's right. Do what makes you happy. Yeah.
If it makes you happy.
Yeah, Cindy.
Wow. Okay. Nancy, I think you read this one, right?
No.
Harry,
Okay, so this will be John's next here.
But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Do not gloat over me, my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will arise. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light.
You see this transition?
Yeah.
I see what God sees. I see that there's evil among us. I see that destruction is due, it's justified. I see that even in our families, even the framework of a society, that's crumbling. But, and here he responds to what he does. And what does he look for?
God looks for the Lord.
Yeah, isn't God doing the judgment?
Yep.
So why is he looking to God?
Because God is his salvation.
Yeah. Yeah. The same God that is righteous and justified to bring judgment is the same God that's merciful and willing to save.
And not just the same God, my God.
Yeah. Right. There's that personal relationship. Excellent point. Yeah. Yeah. I just love the contrast. Though I've fallen, I will rise. Yes, I am being judged now. Yes, I am justified. God is justified in this judgment. But I will rise. Why? Because I'm strong? Because I have, ability? No, because my God is the God of my salvation. I sit in darkness now and despair and hopelessness, but God will be my light. He is my hope. He is my salvation. And you read this, and it's like, this is the gospel message. This is what it is. I deserve, whatever God's justified in doing because of who I am and how I act and how I live and what I hold important. But there's hope. And the hope is in the same God that executes judgment. I just blown away when I read through this, that this is the response when we see evil in the world. This is the response when we are in circumstances we don't like. And this is, what Jeff hit on Sunday. What are good verses for a Merry Christmas? When you're in these situations that aren't peaceful, you lean in to the God of your salvation and you trust him to make it right. And that's exactly what Micah does here. I think it's just a beautiful way that so clear the contrast between the destruction and the hope. Yeah. But as for me in my house, same kind of thing. But as for me, it's a decision. It's a definite decision. Yeah, already talked about that. I think I'm back up at the top with you, Cindy.
Because I have sinned against him, I must endure the rage of the Lord until he argues my case and executes justice for me. He will bring me into the light and I will see his righteousness.
What does executes justice look like for Micah?
What? Well, he's going to suffer the same fate as all the people in the city, because that's what God said was going to happen.
Yeah.
But then he will be restored because he has faith and looks towards the Lord, and that's what God said he would do.
Yeah. How has God executed justice for us?
Through the death of Jesus.
Exactly. Exactly right. Exactly right. The justice that is due us, the judgment that is due us, and God's justification for doing that is executed. And it's executed on a cross. But out of that execution of justice, we are brought into the light. Pretty cool stuff, I think.
Do you think he's talking about this world, or do you think he's talking about the spiritual world, heaven?
I think he still looks at it as a restoration of the remnant here on earth.
Okay.
But prophecy has a way of being both for the audience that it's written to, and also for future.
Mhm.
And I see Christ in this.
Right. Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. So I think, through the prophetic, through what the Spirit tells him, I think he's pointing us to, we are like these nations, of Israel. We are like them in that we are God's justified in taking judgment. We don't have anything to stand on, but he will argue that case. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
That's why we have a Bible to look back on and see
Right.
the mistakes and
Yeah.
how we can go on.
And see God's faithfulness through that too. Yeah. Don't read the Old Testament because it's all about judgment. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of that in there, but there's also this kind of hope. And I think we lose track of this sometimes. Okay, Sean or Abigail?
Then my enemy will see and will be covered with shame. She who said to me, "Where is the Lord your God?" My eyes will see her. At that time, she will be trampled like mud in the streets.
Yeah, so even the enemies that scorned them, they're going to see the salvation as well. And then Nancy.
For the day of rebuilding your walls will come, the day for extending your boundary. On that day, they will come to you from Assyria and from the cities of Egypt, even from Egypt to the Euphrates, from sea to sea and mountain to mountain. Then the earth will become desolate because of its inhabitants, as the fruit of their deeds.
Yeah, and he's talking about this talked earlier about God shepherding his people and bringing them back. And the day for rebuilding the walls will come, and they will gather from all over because they're being dispersed. Okay, and then Harry or Chris.
Shepherd with your staff your people, the flock of your inheritance. They live alone in a woodland surrounded by pastures. Let them graze in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old.
Yeah, so this is Micah's prayer. Shepherd, bring them together. Like sheep that have gone astray, right? Bring them together, your staff and your people, and bring them back together to graze like they did before. Restore them to where they were before.
So is this where we look at the modern Israel and think of that as this promise?
It was before this, because it's Nehemiah is actually from Babylon, and they restored the city walls, and they've been dispersed since then, and now they've been restored. So it's kind of this ongoing cycle. I don't know if this is referring to that, but there was a restoration after Babylon captivity. Okay, and I'm back to you, John.
Oops. As in the days when you came out of Egypt, I will show my wonders. Nations will see and be ashamed, deprived of all their might. They will put their hands over their mouths, their ears.
Yeah. The nations will see this restoration, and the mocking they did before, they'll have nothing to say. Back to you, Cindy.
They will lick the dust like a snake, like reptiles slithering on the ground. They will crawl from their holes in the presence of the Lord our God. They will tremble in fear of you.
Again, talking about the nations. And then Abigail or Sean.
Who is a God like you, who pardons iniquity and passes over the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? Who does not retain his anger forever, because he delights in loving devotion?
there's a song like that. You know, who you have to sing it a little louder for us to understand what that song is, but I know that's the song.
I don't know all the words, but I was thinking of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, it just kind of hit me that who's a God like you? I mean, this is after hearing what God's going to do, after hearing God's justification for what he's going to do, Micah has this realization that yes, we're all sinners and we all deserve this judgment that's coming. God is justified in doing it. He is right to bring his rod of discipline on us. He's right to do it. He agrees with that. And then he has that verse about pleading, God, you'll execute your justice and then you will restore. And now we're into this last three verses, which is just this beautiful praise of who God is. And Micah reaches that conclusion because he understands that God is righteous and God is justified. And yet he still loves us and he still desires to have a relationship with us and he still desires to restore us to himself. And so he has this beautiful 3-verse praise. And, who is a God like that? It's not vindictive, that's merciful, that can pass over the transgressions. He's been right, he's been wrong, and he's right to call that wrong out. And yet he preserves the remnant. They don't deserve it. They don't earn it, but he preserves them for it. He won't be angry forever. He delights in loving devotion. And then Nancy, you get to finish it.
All righty. He will again have compassion on us. He will vanquish our iniquities. He will cast out all our sins into the depths of the sea. He will show faithfulness to Jacob and loving devotion to Abraham, as you swore to our fathers from the days of old.
Yeah. Just let that soak in a little bit. And we're all on this side of the cross. So we've all benefited. We've all seen this in our own lives. We've seen the compassion that we don't deserve. We've seen our iniquities done away with. We've seen our sins cast out and the promise they're cast out forever. We've seen him be a faithful God, a God of promise, a God that made the promises to Abraham and the promises to Jacob. And you swore on your own good word that there will be an eternal relationship, that there will be an eternal fellowship with our Creator. You've promised that. You've covenanted that. We rely on that. It's just remarkable to me in the face of the gloom and doom as we work through the judgment that's to come. What Micah sees out of that is not a God of doom and gloom, but really a beautiful picture of who God is. Kind of summed up this way. You praise and faith to a covenant God, one that is faithful, one that is compassionate, one that is forgiving, one that is merciful, and one that will restore. And shouldn't we do the same? I kind of look at our world, at least what's prompted this whole study for me is kind of where my mind's been this whole year, and seeing things that I know aren't right, seeing things that I know God doesn't like. And God's justified to take action. He is. I see that too. But can I pray like Micah prays in response to that? Can I rely on my God, who is faithful, compassionate, forgiving, merciful, and wants to restore.
You have to.
Yeah, yeah. Because you can't do it any other way,
No.
you know? Not with the rivers of oil and the other, illustrations that he said, you can't buy your way out of this situation. You really do have to fall on your knees. All right. Well, I've got one more slide. And for me, these ancient words provide a sobering reality check. As I look at my world, as I look at myself even, I rely on the grace of the cross. I do. But I think there's a lesson here when we see how God actually does deal with nations and with leaders and with people who abandon him and forget his righteousness. And what would you say if you have a similar response? What would you say the lesson is as we read Micah?
Well, similarly to what Micah sees, I mean, in a world gone mad, when you look to the cross and you look to God, there is still hope.
There's so many different things that you can pull out of it when you talk about like a nation as a whole, but a nation is made up of individuals. And being a part of a nation that's going to be judged and punished, God will still find the remnant who loves him and serves him and take care of them, even if they have to suffer the hardship alongside the others.
Yeah.
But he waits a long time. He's super patient. But then as individuals, he looks into our lives and sees things that, hey, this isn't really what we need. And so he cuts that away and throws it in the fire, gets rid of that.
Yeah.
The Bible study we did last year, by Lisa Turkhurst, she said, she talks about being ground down into dust to be reformed. And I said, I've never actually been like completely ground to dust, but I've been power sanded a couple times. Just
Prefer pruned.
Yeah, and he, it's painful and uncomfortable, but in the end, it's always worth it because he makes us better.
We need to learn to love God. And if we love God, we're going to love our fellow human being, all of them, and treat them the way they should be treated.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that verse, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. I mean, it's be fair, care, and share.
Oh, yeah. I like that. Yeah. So simple, but so difficult. Yeah. All right, I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording.